Welcome everybody. Great. Well, I see some familiar names and some familiar faces. It's great. We have some clients on the line as well as some folks, friends and colleagues from across the country, and also several strangers. So welcome to everybody, whether you are a friend of the family or just interested in the topic for tonight. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Joe Booth and I'm the practice director and founder here at Class 5 Mind. And Class 5 Mind is a modern platform for addiction recovery. We take a holistic approach to addiction and recovery in general. And tonight we have with us somebody that I've been admiring from afar for a very long time, several years now. In fact, one of his books is one of the first ones that I read when I got into recovery. And that is this one right here, which is Buddhism and the 12 Steps Workbook. And there's just so much knowledge in here, not only from a Buddhist standpoint and a 12 Steps recovery standpoint, but just life. Kevin Griffin is somebody that has truly transformed who he was into somebody that he is proud to be. And I'm really honored to have him on with us today. And he will give a proper introduction for himself in just a moment. But before he does that, I want to just ground people here on the topic that we have tonight with the meditation workshop and a little bit about why we're here and what we do. So as I mentioned, Class 5 Mind is a holistic recovery platform. We focus on the person as a whole, and we look at different things that touch our physical, emotional, and spiritual selves. Things like meditation and breath, emotional intelligence, cognitive priming, and then of course the physical stuff like sleep and well-being and diet and exercise and nutrition. And the Class 5 Mind program is really an intensive 8-week cycle, and it's a year-long membership. And during that initial 8 weeks, we really try and work with our clients to establish some new routines, a healthy wake-up time and sleep cycle, morning and evening mindset work, as well as carving out time during the day to find a moment of Zen and get a little bit of meditation in. And then on the weekly cycle, we do a field guide activity, which is part of the workbook that our clients use. We have a group meeting, which happens every Monday night from 6 to 7 Pacific. We do one-on-one accountability sessions with our folks. And there's also an entire e-learning track to support holistic recovery. And as we talked about tonight, we have meditation. And you're probably wondering why I have some of these folks on this slide. And it's not because I'm a Lakers fan and LeBron James set another NBA record last night by winning I think his 6th or 7th NBA championship, but more importantly with a third team. So that's incredible leadership. Some of the other folks on here like Oprah, Jerry Seinfeld, Mark Benioff, J-Lo, and Steve Jobs, what they all have in common is they use, and in the case of Steve Jobs, who's deceased, all of these people use meditation to help them achieve focus, bliss, relaxation, and help them achieve really performance at the highest levels. And not everybody that reaches high levels of performance meditates, and not everybody that meditates reaches high levels of performance, but it is something that a lot of people have in common, and it's something that I do daily. And what I love about meditation is the health aspects that we have for our brain, specifically around holistic recovery, the things that really tie back to addiction and forming new habits and overcoming cravings. So that front part of our brain, that blue part that's highlighted there, is our prefrontal cortex. And what we know is that meditation helps grow and strengthen that part of our brain, which helps with decision-making, awareness, and executive functioning. And then that orange highlighted part is our limbic system. And this is where we have all the emotional parts of our brain, like fear, and desire and reward and happy and sad. So being able to control the emotional reactions that often trigger us into having impulses. Meditation helps with our memory. And one of my favorite parts about it is gamma waves, which is that feeling of bliss that people often experience when they get into deep meditation. And I absolutely love it. So when we think about how this can help calm somebody down, being able to have that awareness of self and awareness of others, being able to control our cravings and our impulses, it really leads to a balance as the person and represented in our brain, and many people believe at a spiritual level as well. So I'm very excited to have Kevin on to be able to not only talk about his incredible experience with meditation as a student and as a teacher, but also to help answer your questions so some of you can either refine or develop the practices that you have today. We are going to be doing a bit of a discussion and lecture that Kevin will be leading, and then we're also going to be doing a brief meditation practice where we're all going to get into that together and then discuss how we felt that experience went as a group. I'm very excited to have Kevin on the line with us. Kevin, please take it away.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thank you for inviting me. Nice to be with you folks in the way that we can be together right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own life, shall we call it a journey, but definitely has been a journey. And then about the practice that I teach and try to put that in context of recovery as well. And then I'll do a guided meditation and then open it up. So I spent a lot of my early adult life as a musician, not particularly successful, but enough to make a living and to spend a lot of time in bars. So it was a perfect situation in order for an alcoholic and a drug addict. After my early years of extreme sort of late teenage drinking and using, I sort of settled into a regular beer and marijuana habit for about 15 years. And you know, that was, I mean, being a musician was great. I love music, still love music. But my life didn't progress in those years at all, either on a professional level, on an emotional level, in a relationship level. It was just like flat, really, for a long time. And but there was always in me a longing for something more beyond rock and roll stardom, which was, of course, my main longing. But there was a longing too for something spiritual, some deeper meaning in my life. And you know, I came of age in the 60s, so that was a common kind of theme for many people in those years. And you know, I was mostly flirting around with sort of new agey type things for a long time, until I discovered Buddhist meditation and mindfulness practice. And so, you know, I have this sort of odd experience that I got very into meditation before I got sober. I started doing it very seriously in my late 20s. I didn't get sober till I was 35. And that kind of gave me some insight into how some of the negative ways that or negative expectations we can have about meditation, that we can have some idea that it's going to fix us or have some magical way of transforming our lives. And meditation alone really doesn't solve problems for most people. It solves certain problems, but it doesn't solve your life. And my life needed, real problem solving. So when I got sober, I realized that I was very evolved as a meditator, but that I was really stunted in terms of both my sort of the way I lived, my lifestyle. I was poor financially, really barely could support myself. And as I say, emotionally, really not mature and really not able to sustain a relationship either. And those were all things I wanted. I wanted to be comfortable financially. I wanted to be professionally satisfied. I wanted to have a relationship that worked. And I didn't have any of those things. So it felt in a lot of ways when I got sober that I was starting from scratch. But fortunately I wasn't, because the background of meditation did help me in the 12 steps, they include meditation in the 11th step, which was actually one of the things that made me feel comfortable going into those rooms, like everyone else who considers going to AA or NA or any of the A's. I had a lot of resistance. I wasn't really up for that. But and once I did step in those rooms and I saw that, at least I felt like there was some space for me. In any case, I did really work that program very sincerely. Uh, and, and those externals started to really change in my life. At a certain point, at like 5 or 6 years sober, I realized that the kind of 12-step language, particularly the God stuff and sort of a lot of the way it's framed, didn't really resonate for me. It had really helped me in terms of sort of on this practical level, but in terms of going deeper spiritually, it wasn't going to be my path. And that was when I really kind of tried to start to integrate my Buddhist practice with the 12 steps, which is why there is that book. That my first book is called One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps. And the workbook is my third book, I think. I have 5 out. My memory, I'm not sure about memory there, Joe, At a certain age, it doesn't matter how much you meditate, but we can put that aside for now.
Well, one of the other ones that I have from you, Kevin, is Recovering Joy.
Oh, yeah. Well, there.
And this is a great one, I think, for people that are dealing with the trauma and the pain of, the aftermath of either hitting rock bottom or just trying to avoid rock bottom and sort of like bouncing off the atmosphere of it, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's a great one as well.
Thank you. And that, I also had a secondary disease, depression. And that book was very much written out of my experience of, I don't like to say overcoming, but learning to hold and handle those tendencies in ways that they were no longer crippling. So in any case, my kind of journey, my path sort of evolved into kind of blending Buddhism and recovery, and specifically the 12 steps, but more generally the path of recovery and thinking about that. So that it eventually, because when I went back to school, my creative impulses, which had been channeled into music, became channeled into writing. And so I went from being a musician to being a writer, sort of, they feel very similar to me. Which is, I've been really fortunate that, that people have wanted to hear what I have to say, that I've been able to write books that people wanted to read. And so for me, this path is very integrated in terms of what mindfulness and recovery mean, because there's this fundamental element, which is actually something I'm giving a talk about tomorrow morning, which we call renunciation in Buddhism, which sort of has this alienating sound because it sounds like you're going to have to wear a hair shirt and, I don't know, give up all your, pleasures and, move to the monastery and shave your head. But really, renunciation really refers to giving up the destructive elements of your life. And certainly recovery is a step in renunciation, giving up drugs and alcohol or food or whatever your addiction is. But further, the deeper meaning of renunciation is giving up the kind of trying to fix everything, trying to control everything, and trying to sort of protect the ego and all of those sort of really internal elements that are the real roots of our suffering, the real causes of suffering. So I don't see addiction is just a manifestation of something deeper, right? It's rarely is it just the drug or the drink or the the food or the gambling or the sex addiction. It's rarely that thing that's really behind it. And I think one of the things we get out of meditation is that we get to go deeper into ourselves and touch those parts of us that are hurt, that are vulnerable, that need healing. And it's a way to begin that process in many levels. So just to now talk a little bit about this practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation is a particular kind of meditation, and it's surprises people when they first learn it to sort of come to see that it's not about shutting off their thinking. It's not about exactly imposing control on the mind. There is some power and some control that we gain out of the practice, but it comes out of letting go, which is, of course, what makes it challenging. And the typical image of meditation is that you're going to learn a mantra or some sort of special practice that's going to just transport you into a different place, and you're going to have this like altered experience. And I think, people's experience with psychedelics can often sort of create these impressions in their mind, like, oh, that's a spiritual experience. And that can be a spiritual experience, but it's not really what mindfulness meditation is about. Mindfulness meditation is simpler and more grounded, I would say, and more about our direct experience moment to moment. So it, at its essence, is trying to get at what is really true. What is our experience of life? What is in our minds? What is in our hearts? How are we being controlled by our impulses, by our cravings, and then learning how to be less reactive to those impulses, to what they call in Buddhism greed, hatred, and delusion. Not being so easily triggered, to being able to develop more balance. One of the terms that's used for describing somebody who's experienced and deepened their practice through mindfulness is equanimity. Is this quality of balanced mind, a mind that's not easily disturbed. So we could say then that it's inclining towards peace, which, just as Joe was talking about, in the states, when we can get into those states, they can be very blissful. They can be beautiful states. But the states themselves are not the kind of goal. It's more the clarity of mind and seeing clearly, the insight, which is another term for this meditation, the insight that we gain that allows us to not be, again, so enslaved by our own cravings, our own tendencies. So meditation is kind of like the ground floor in this process. I mean, I guess in truth, the ground floor is letting go of the substances, but in terms of the transformative process, meditation kind of lays this foundation. As I say, mindfulness meditation kind of lays this foundation for then opening more, learning to let go, having more clarity, having more insight. The simple way that I like to talk about the benefits of meditation in terms of recovery, and it's true for everyone, but particularly for recovery, is that there are two main things that we can get right away from practicing meditation. One is just the calm and just some periods of quiet, which is just really invaluable. It's so hard, especially in our culture as it is today, to just stop. To just stop. And that's actually a form of renunciation, just to stop and not look at a screen for a while, or not be getting entertainment or distraction. So it stops, but it allows us to be quiet and have some calm and develop intentional calm. And then the second piece, which is more what I'm talking about with mindfulness, is that it gives us more clarity about what is going on in my mind. When we can start to see our thoughts before we act on them, this is the beginning of freedom, because it means that we're able to actually make choices in regard to what arises in the mind. And when we see that impulse, when we see that thought, and when we start to understand the roots of it, we start to know that, oh, this impulse that I have, this is deep rooted. It goes back to that time in my childhood or whatever. Some of that's, more therapeutic, but still we get to see those things. We start to see the chain of causality, if you will, the cause and effect that brings about, oh, I have this impulse, but I know where it's coming from. And maybe more important, I know where it's going if I follow it. So just having that space that the calm gives you then can give you the opportunity to see these things and to make different choices in the moment, in real time. And that's, of course, how we survive. That's how we save ourselves, is by the choices we make moment by moment by moment. Recovery takes time. And that's one thing that addicts, we have no patience. For us, it's like, we need it now. I don't have time for this, it's the problem. But to see this and to realize, this is the only way to get it. You can't get it. Like, there's no like app that you can download and you're fixed. Now, I remember early in my recovery, when I was considering going back to school, I said to my sponsor in AA, I said, well, if I go back to college now, I'm in my late 30s, I'll be in my 40s by the time I even graduate. He said, yeah, but in 4 years, you're going to be in your 40s anyway. And you could either have a degree or you could just be going along the way you are now. And it kind of, oh, duh, that kind of realization that, these ideas we have about time, and oh, I should be somewhere by now. I mean, how many of us have had that thought? Oh, I should have done more with my life by now. Oh, I'm 30 or I'm 40 or I'm 50. I should have done this. And completely irrelevant, right? Where are you now? And what are you creating for your future? And finally, I'll say that for me, once I engaged in the path of recovery, it didn't feel like I had to get anywhere else. It was joyful as it was. My life became full and rich right away. Now, I can look back and say, oh, when I was a year sober or 2 years sober or 5 years sober, I had so much more to learn and so much more to grow. Sure. But at those times, I still felt like my life had changed radically, so even as it takes time to transform, there is a sudden transformation that happens when we take that radical turn in our lives. So it feels a bit like I'm selling you on recovery. I hope I am. I don't know. I'm not going to get rich at it.
I'm convinced.
Okay.
I love these two lines. You're such a poet. I mean, you could hear the music in you still coming out, the lyrics. There's no app you can download and you're fixed. And you live in Berkeley, so do I. I've been working for Silicon Valley companies for 10 years. I can name probably 5 that would argue with you right now based on their thesis that has been, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in it. And the truth is what you said, the apps don't work unless you put the time in on them. There's tons of apps on my phone I never open. I love that line. There's no app you can download and you're fixed. And then this other one that you said, which is, we phrase it differently here at Class 5 Mind. We call it the who am I becoming statement. Who am I becoming? And the way that you put it, I think, is so eloquent. What are you now? And what are you creating for your future? I just love that. It's about acceptance, awareness, and walking in the path that you want to create for yourself.
Yeah, that fundamental idea that the only time you can change your life is in this moment. You can't go back and change the past, and you can't go out into the future. And how much of the time do we think, well, when I get there, when I finish this, then when I get my degree, when I get married, when I have a kid, when I get the job, then, and it's like, well, okay, hopefully, yeah, that happens. But what are you doing right now? That's like moving you in the direction you want to go. And it's usually not necessarily a big thing, just like you taking care of yourself. Yeah, that's probably the number one thing to me. Take care of yourself on all levels, mentally, spiritually, emotionally.
Well, Kevin, it's 6:28. We're about halfway through.
We should meditate.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm gonna dim my light for this.
I would. I'd have us.
I'm taking it seriously. I'm dimming my lights.
Okay, I've got my ring light, which you can see in my glasses now. But so we could easily meditate for the rest of the session, but that wouldn't give you much time to talk. So I think we'll probably do about 10, 12 minutes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through kind of a way to start your meditation period, and then kind of how to arrive. So it's going to be like settling in, being aware of your body, being aware of sound, being aware of your mood, and then starting to focus on the breath. And this is the way I like to approach meditation, rather than saying, okay, now we're going to pay attention to our breath and shut everything out. Rather, I like to start with more of an openness of just sort of being aware of what's going on right here, right now, and then gradually letting that a little bit of relaxation settle, and then start to focus on the breath. So however you're sitting, you can close your eyes, but you do want to be sitting upright, preferably, and in a way that you can sit still. Holding your body still actually helps you to calm the mind and quiet the mind. And it helps you to see the movements in the mind. So as you close the eyes, quiet the body, let's do some intentional relaxation. Relaxing the muscles in the jaw. Just really loosening your jaw. That's one of the places we hold a lot of tension. As you do that, then relaxing the eyes and forehead as well. So the whole face, soft. Releasing the shoulders as we move our attention downward. So sometimes we tend to hunch our shoulders, so just releasing there. Maybe taking a deeper breath and letting the bodies start to really settle. As you do that, having a sense of softening your belly. So this is one of the other places we hold tension. And just let your belly out. Nobody's watching. Letting the chest be open. So how we're holding the body, our posture affects this. If we're slumped, then the chest will collapse and then we don't get as much oxygen. This is one of the reasons we want to be upright. giving space for the lungs. Let your attention just move down your arms into your hands, just to feel sensations. And relaxing through the hips and pelvis, down through the legs and feet. Letting your attention go into the feet for a moment. So in the simplest sense, this is mindfulness of the body, just feeling yourself sitting. It can be striking to notice how many sensations there are in our body when we actually start to pay attention. The body's alive, bright with energy. Now, wherever you are, noticing if there are any sounds in your environment, letting your attention scan for sounds and listen to any sounds that are evident. You might even notice sounds in your own body, sound of your breath or your heart, or the sounds inside your ears. So there's awareness of the body, awareness of sounds, just these different areas that we can be mindful of that help us to be present. We can only hear sounds in the present moment. We can only feel our body in the present moment. So that awareness just naturally brings us here, now. And now I want to ask you to see if you can tune into your mood. This is more subtle than body and sound. How are you feeling? How do you know what you're feeling? What are the cues? Our mood and our mind state has so much of an influence on our thinking and on our behavior. Yet we rarely look just at that experience. We tell stories about it, think about it, we analyze it, we try to fix it. But just to sit with it, just to be with it. This is one of the ways that we find our way to equanimity, to learn to just be with our feelings. Not easy for an addict. It's one of the main reasons we use, is to avoid feeling. But in mindfulness meditation, we find a safe place to feel, to just be open for a few minutes. And now finally bringing the attention to the breath. You can notice the whole body breathing. And then finding a point of sensation either at the nostrils, where you feel the air coming in and out, or at the belly, where the belly and the chest rise and fall with the breath. So let your attention go to one of those points, either the nostrils or the belly, and feel your breath coming in and going out. It's natural for the mind to wander. When we try to pay attention to the breath, we'll often find we drift off into thoughts. So with mindfulness meditation, our practice is to notice that. Notice when we're thinking, acknowledge that, and then come back. And during any period of meditation, we may be coming back over and over. That's okay. We're training the mind to come back. And we're starting to see what is in the mind. We're starting to see our own mind. Try to tune in to the subtle sensations of breath. If a sound arises, you can notice that, acknowledge that, and then come back to the breath. Some sensation in the body, you can acknowledge that, come back. So the breath becomes a kind of anchor or home base we keep coming back to. Gradually, little by little, things start to settle. A bit more clarity arises. We're less seduced by the mind. Okay. I don't know if you heard my wife running the water upstairs. I think she might have been washing some lettuce, but never quite sure what gets picked up on the microphones. It's just another sound. So I'd like to open it up for any questions about anything I've talked about, or anything you think that I could be helpful with, or certainly about meditation, but really anything.
What are your best kind of tips and tricks on meditating while doing kind of low activity like walking or things like that?
Great question. Thank you. So when you go on a meditation retreat in this tradition, we actually teach walking meditation. And it kind of gets you into the habit of paying attention to the body. So a couple things. First of all, you kind of have to turn off your Spotify or your podcast, and just sort of allow yourself to be, so not to distract yourself. And then you start to, well, asking for tips is a good way to put it, because I don't want to say there's like one way to do it, but what I do if I'm trying to like really get into my body when I'm walking is first just pay attention to my feet. They're very simple, right? I'm walking, pay attention to my feet. And I just start by just feeling my feet on the ground as I'm walking. Then I start to kind of, once I feel like, okay, I'm just walking now, then because I don't want to like take a whole walk and just pay attention to my feet, I'll kind of then expand my attention into more of my body, kind of feel myself moving through space, just the flow of the body. And that can be very pleasant because you start to feel, oh, that's nice. Like walking is a really pleasant activity. And then I usually bring in visual and just look. One of the things I've noticed is that if I walk with my head down, I tend to be more in my thoughts. So I lift my head and look around. It's a kind of simple idea, but mindfulness is really the kind of basis of mindfulness is being aware of your sense experience as well as your mind, but your sense experience is sort of the first point. So you can just like be mindful of what you're seeing, or mindful of what you're hearing, noticing sound of birds, noticing buildings, noticing people, noticing, and it can get really interesting if you start to pay attention to when you see people, what your judgments are about them. If you want to be really mindful. I did this practice for when I was working in San Francisco as a tech writer back in the 90s. I did this loving kindness meditation where between BART and my office on 2nd Street or Folsom, I would walk up 2nd, is that right? Anyway, which was about 10 minutes, I would say, may you be happy to each person I walked past. And what I immediately realized was that I had a judgment about each person, homeless person, business person, old person, attractive young person. It was like so interesting to see how my mind makes these judgments so quickly. And so those kind of, so there's mindfulness of the body and then starting to be mindful of the mind, right? So that's, but when you find yourself going off, you come back into your body, come back into your feet, so kind of keep that kind of foundation for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's, one of the things about me is one question is often enough from all, but just to briefly to say, there's the great Vietnamese Zen teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who teaches a lot about just mindfulness in daily activities. And he has he talks about being mindful when you're washing the dishes, you know, mindful when you're making the bed, just like mindful when you're in your car. And so it's really just a matter, you can apply this principle to anything, right? Just whatever you're doing, pay attention to what you're doing. Because we have such a habit, and, you know, I'm certainly not immune to this, such a habit of like, as I'm doing the dishes, I'm thinking about something else, you know, and I'm figuring, because doing the dishes seems like, oh, this is just a trivial task, you know, and I don't like to wash the dishes, so I want to think about something else. But inevitably you find that when you actually pay attention to anything, any task, there's actually a certain kind of joy in it, because you're being awake and aware. Yeah. Other questions?
You just mentioned what's his name?
Thich Nhat Hanh, yes.
Han. Did you have any other suggestions in terms of reading? That's some of your favorites.
Yeah, I mean, my first two teachers, which is 40 years ago, anyway, they've both become kind of leading teachers in the Western Buddhism. Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein. I'll put their names in the chat. You know, and they've both written multiple books, but Jack Kornfield's book, A Path with Heart, is kind of is really the classic. And it's one that people in recovery really like a lot. It's real because it doesn't just address like meditation or even spirituality. It's much more like about healing in a way, but through a spiritual path. And Joseph Goldstein, typing, I'm losing my typing skills now. Joseph Goldstein, his most recent book is kind of a culmination of all his work, and it's just called Mindfulness. It has a subtitle, but boy, I tell you, you know, between those two books, they're both substantial books too. You know, but you would be really well educated in this path with those two. Yeah.
Awesome.
I do have like I'll give you my website, because you can actually email me through my website too, and see some of my other classes, but just kevingriffin.net, because I have a page on there with a lot of books listed, but you know, you don't want to get overloaded. Start with one or two. I mean, I think that, you know, it's another way that we kind of reinforce our practice and this process is by just studying, and not like, oh, I'm going to read this book and get all this information, but rather, you know, a little bit each day to just keep us kind of fresh. I'm actually I'm just about finished writing a daily reflections book, which is meant for that, like one page to read each day, you know. Any of the women have anything to say? I'm aware of how men like to, not these men in particular, but some men tend to dominate conversations sometimes. And not me, of course, just, you know, other men. Anyway.
So,
Hi.
what about like when you're trying to bring yourself back into focus?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know how when we're trying to be mindful and our mind goes off on a tangent of talking about things that aren't even real, but we create situations for ourselves in our head?
Yeah.
What are some good ways of turning your mind off?
Well, I don't like the idea of turning my mind off, but I mean, I get your question. I think I understand your question, but I do want to reframe it because that sort of suggests that our mind is our enemy or something. You know, and I mean, our capacity to think and our capacity to be rational is what makes human beings what we are. So it's an amazing gift, but it like any other power, when misused, as we usually do, it becomes a problem. So, but to get at kind of what you're talking about, what I find most helpful is when I'm really caught in some stuff and I realize it, because I can't do anything until I realize it. But in that moment when I realize, oh, what am I thinking about this for? You know, or God, this is really crazy,
Right.
or really getting me off. Again, I drop into my body, but I drop into my body to feel the emotion that's underneath it. Because most of the time, what's going on is that there's something going on emotionally or something in my mood that's triggering these thoughts. And if I try to just push the thoughts away, the feelings are still there. And the thing is, as an addict, I don't want to feel. That's what, like,
Right.
so, but if we're going to recover, we have to learn how to feel. That's just at the heart of this process. So hopefully, you know, one of the things that I think mindfulness can give us is this kind of safe way to turn toward our feelings, to just breathe and kind of just check in, like, oh, what am I feeling? And kind of in a very kind way to realize that these disturbances in the mind and in the heart, if you will, you know, that they are really difficult and that we deserve care and compassion. There's a lot of times we beat ourselves up for feeling bad. Like, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Like, well, that's not helpful at all. That rather, this idea of self-compassion, that I'm going to turn towards my own feelings and say, oh, not self-pity, but self-care. Like, this is difficult. And and I care about you, and I'm gonna let these feelings be here. I'm not gonna push them away, but I'm not gonna feed them. The thing is, we feed our negative mind states by thinking about them, by either going off on them or by judging them and fighting with them. And so that this mindfulness is really a middle way, which is not pushing it away, not hanging on to it, but just resting in it, just being with it, breathing with it, allowing it, and recognizing that this is just a feeling. It's just an energy that's passing through. And when I see it as something that's not just this solid thing that I can't stand this, it's never going to go away, but I see it as, oh, this is a painful energy that's happening right now, but I'm okay. And then, of course, you know, so there's this process, right? I see what's going on. I see something's disturbing. I turn toward the feeling. I try to be kind to the feeling. And then, and only then, do I do something to see about shifting it. So then I might be like, I really need to call a friend. I really need to get out and get some exercise. I really need to meditate, you know, whatever it is, right? Well, then we do the positive thing. But if we try to jump in and intervene and fix it right away before we've really seen it, then we're never really allowing it to be there. And it's always going to be kind of working around in the background. Yeah.
All right. I like that. So we want to address the feeling first.
Yes.
And then from there, you come up with a rational solution to.
Yeah.
Awesome.
A
Thank you.
skillful response. Yeah. So a couple minutes. So Jennifer, you were going to say something?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Kevin, for this presentation tonight. This has been very helpful and wonderful. I just noticed that during my meditation that we completed, you know, at one point doing the breath work, I actually started getting like a tingling sensation that ran from my head kind of went in a wave down my body on the inhale, and then, kind of dissipates on the exhale. What is it that I could be experiencing or tapping into there?
Well, I'm not sure I can say exactly what you're tapping into, except what I think is important to understand about this practice is that when we do get into a place where we're kind of letting go of our ordinary thinking, we actually have a shift in perception. So we actually start to feel our body in a different way. And the fact is that our body can be perceived as a field of energy, because that's really what it is, right? It seems solid, but it's actually constantly moving, right? On the atomic level. And so when we get quiet, we start to feel there can be all kinds of things that happen. And so one of the reasons I don't want to try to figure out exactly what you were experiencing in that moment is that the next time you meditate, you might have something completely different happen. And if you get into an idea that, oh, this is what's supposed to happen, or this is what I like to happen in my meditation, then you wind up kind of restricting what's happening. That there's a lot that can get processed, like when you're, again, when you quiet the mind, it's like there's subconscious stuff that might be stuck in the body. Trauma gets stuck in the body, but also, yeah, like this lightness, this joy, this inherent joy of, oh, my body's alive. It's a lot that we miss because we're so much in our heads. So for now, I would just say, keep letting whatever's arising arise, and pay attention to it and feel it, be with it fully, allow it to come through.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Even just the idea of, don't have expectations, that I'm wanting to put some kind of an expectation on something. But, so that's interesting. That's just interesting thought, because, as somebody who wants to substitute maybe one thing for another, it's like, that could be a dangerous trap when you expect something and you try and create some kind of a pattern where you are getting that every time, but then don't, or maybe there's a situation that you don't. So that could be yet another trap. So
right. Very good.
Interesting. Thank
Very
you.
good. You see exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the key thing. As addicts, we know how to go into altered states, we created altered states, but then we can, in meditation can create altered states. And we can get this idea that, oh, that's why we're doing this. It's very important to understand all states are impermanent. There's nothing that's solid. And when we get attached to one, then we're in a struggle with reality. We're in a struggle with that truth of impermanence. What's more important than the states is the insight and the wisdom that we can come by observing them and learning how they arise and how they pass. When we can just accept that everything is impermanent, that's a transformative realization if we can live with that every moment. Thanks, Jennifer.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Personally, I'm just so happy I finally got you, and I really appreciate everything that you've done, you are doing, and that you will do. And I'd like to end with another quote. Obviously, this is actually we have our workbook, which is we call it the field journal here. And in week 7, we do there is a process of self-reflection, and the exercise is called Me, Myself, and I, where you actually have like a dialogue between your current self, your past self, and your innocent self. And the quote that I chose for the beginning of that week is by you, and it's, breathe and accept yourself, knowing that the past is gone and that the new you deeply regrets your behavior. And I think that just ties in so nicely to what you were saying about deciding who you are now and what you want to do moving forward and the kind of person that you want to become. And the mindfulness practice that you brought us through tonight around developing calm, intentional calm, as well as clarity, I think is a great path to follow for that. So thank you again so much. I really do appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun. I wish you all well, and stick to this path of recovery. It's going to make everything better.